Hello again, witches, seekers, and friends, and welcome to the Fat Feminist Witch Podcast, the show where we do a little ranting, raving, and wand waving. I'm your host, Paige, and together we're going to explore magic and spirituality, social justice, the psychic realm, and most importantly, the moon. Hey friends, and thank you so much for joining me today on this beautiful, though cloudy, very first day of October. That's right, it is officially the season of the witch. I'm so pumped. This year's Halloween season is especially special because the month of October is bookended by these two beautiful full moons. So tonight's full moon is the harvest moon in the sign of Aries. And then on Halloween night, October 31st, we have the supreme pleasure of a blue moon in the lovely sign of Taurus. So how beautiful, how incredible is that? I'm so excited about it. Especially because for months now, people have been joking about Halloween being canceled because of the pandemic, right? But I'm here to tell you that so far, I have seen the exact opposite. So as I record this, it is still September, and I have already seen more than a dozen houses decorated for Halloween here in my city, and probably another dozen out in the smaller towns throughout my county. So my sister and I took a really long drive around Essex County, where we live. Fun fact, this is also the name of the county in Massachusetts that Salem is in. But we went for a nice long drive. It was a beautiful day. We were, hitting vegetable stands and things like that. And we saw tons of houses, not just with corn stalks and pumpkins, but also with ghosts and creepy clowns and floating witch hats and little black cats and mini graveyards, just all over the place. And this is really neat because over the last, honestly, I'd say 10 years or so, I've noticed that the number of houses in every neighborhood that decorate for Halloween, there's less and less every year. Even houses that hand out candy these days often have no decorations up. And this is, of course, that's fine. The kids getting the candy don't totally mind, I promise. But that very creative and exciting energy of decorating for Halloween was so powerful when I was a kid. And lately I've been feeling that this was lacking. Maybe it's because this year we've had to sacrifice and miss out on so much, that people are putting in this effort. They're going for it. Or maybe it's because of, these magical full moons. But either way, I have a distinct feeling that this Halloween will be even more meaningful than usual. Halloween is far from canceled, and in fact, it is just beginning. This month, I'm putting out an episode of the show every single week, focusing on different Halloween topics for real witches. So today, I'm so super excited to begin the month of October with an interview with Michael Herkes, author of The Glam Witch, all about his personal practice as a devotee of Lilith, and the complete book of moon spells, which came out the same day as my book, July 14th this year. Our books are fraternal twins, isn't that fun? I recently reviewed the complete book of moon spells on my website, and I gave it 5 crystal balls for its combination of very serious and authentic moon magic, spells, and rituals that are all very appropriate for modern witches, and a whole bunch of totally new ways of working with the moon. And it was all wrapped up in this very glamorous package, because that is what Michael's all about. That is his art, right? I absolutely devoured the book. I read it cover to cover in one day, and then I, went back and actually paid attention and really soaked it in. And all the way through, I just kept thinking, this is exactly the kind of book I've been looking for. As you'll hear Michael and I discuss in the interview, despite the moon being it's such a big deal, it's such a common symbol associated with witchcraft, the amount of books that you can find for modern practitioners just about moon magic is limited. It's so limited. I learned this when I was looking for a moon book for a book club. I could only really find one that sounded legitimate. And when you get into the interview, you'll hear it's the exact same one that Michael talks about. Of course, I'm happy it's not just me that felt this way. So I'm very, very glad that he had the time to come on the show and to talk to me about the moon and, of course, Lilith, glamour, and Halloween. He's just as excited about Halloween as I am. Very, very pumped. So today's special interview with Michael Herkes is sponsored by the lovely witches at Green Moon Apothecary, a subscription box service for canna witches, or witches who use cannabis for magic, self-care, wellness, or just fun. This is a company I work with a lot. I actually helped curate last year's Samhain box, and the beautiful wooden box that came in that one is already out on my ancestor altar that I'm starting to decorate for the season. And I work with them a lot because I love how creative and unique the actual, the makeup of the boxes is, what they put in there. And also because I know for a fact that this company is dedicated to working with local artists and businesses here in Canada that are, run by women, Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, and members of the queer community. They are a Canadian company, but they can ship to Canada and the US. Sorry for everyone else. We'll get there. And they don't sell any actual cannabis, so there's no CBD or THC in the boxes. It's just this really gorgeous, often handmade magical tools and cannabis accessories. So thank you so much to Green Moon Apothecary for sponsoring today's interview. And if you guys pay attention and you listen to the ad later in today's episode, you can get a coupon code for 10% off your first order. And you can find all of their contact info and their website in the description for this episode. So without further ado, I present Michael Herkes, the Glam Witch. Okay, cool. So I am so glad that you had the time to come on to the show today. I'm really excited.
Me too.
Especially because we have these 2 full moons in October. So I'm very excited to be able to talk about the moon in a month when we have 2 of them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pumped. So today we're going to talk a little bit about moon spells and also Lilith. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Cool. So, like I said, thank you. The complete book of moon spells, which came out July 14th, which is super fun. Our books had the same birthday. I love it. Happy birthday. Happy birthday, book. Yeah, it's so cute. I was so excited. What is it that drew you to write a book about the moon? The moon is it's seen as this 101 topic for witches, but yeah. I found your book to be really great for, witches of all different levels. So what led you to be writing a book about the moon for everybody, not just new witches?
Well, thank you. The moon has always been a really, really major aspect of my practice. Looking back at my childhood, I was so captivated by the moon and just have so many memories of watching it outside and just feeling so magical in its luminescent rays. And of course, the moon was always in pretty much any depiction of witches that I was growing up with. And I was totally enthralled in the glamorization of witches of the late 90s, early 2000s when I kind of first started all of this. So it seemed as though it was appropriate to have that as a big part of my practice. And to be honest, when I first started out and doing a lot more research and things on modern witchcraft when I was a young preteen, I loved the aspect of the moon. I loved that there was a femininity towards it and that it honored the goddesses. And I was just always this fun femme little boy. And I loved the moon and the femininity of it. And I think that, even though the moon is very 101, there's not really many books out there on it.
Yes.
And I kind of thought that was surprising too when I started to look into it and think, what do I want my next book to be? And originally it was going to be a complete sequel to The Glam Witch, and it was going to be all Lilithian-based moon rituals. And then I was like, well, The Glam Witch it was deep. It was the documentation of my practice. It was really, really deep. And I wanted to do something that was a little bit more lighthearted and fun, kind of an ode to those little spell books that we grew up with. And I wanted to attract a bigger audience. I wanted my voice to reach different people. And I thought that by doing this moon spell book, it would. And I would get out there, and the things that I have to say would get out there. And ultimately, my connection with Lilith would get out there to more people as well. So that's why I ended up doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. You just hit on so many points I wanted to ask you about. That's wonderful. That's so fantastic. You're very prepared. I love what you said about loving the femininity of the moon, because I think your book is probably the only book on moon magic that I've read that is not written by a woman. And that's really stood out to me right away. Like, But I didn't find, I didn't find any of the femininity lacking from your book, which was great. But
you're not going to find any lacking femininity with me at all, ever.
Well, I was a little worried. I'm like, oh no, is this going to be just like a boy taking over girl stuff? But it didn't feel like that at all. So that's really great.
Perfect.
But how does it feel to be like the only man writing a book about moon magic in our modern times?
Well, actually, I didn't think about it until you just brought it up right now.
Oh, yay.
And it's kind of cool. I've always felt very, very deeply connected to more feminine aspects rather than masculine ones. Again, that's one of the reasons why I just loved modern witchcraft, especially when I was first starting out and hearing about the goddess rather than the god. And even though there was that connection between both of them, I've really always been in a very monogamous relationship with Lilith and working with this extreme feminine deity. And I just think it's cool. I think we're finally in at least the tipping point in society where people are just starting to kind of think that gender is a little bit more fluid and it's not necessarily as black and white as we always thought it was. So I'm happy if I was able to help contribute to that a little bit by being a born male who wrote a book on the moon and still was able to pump it full of life with femininity.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so excited to see you mention that lunar deities are not always women. The vast majority for sure, but there are tons of incredible, like, historical and mythological sources of male lunar deities. Like I said, it was just very interesting to see that actually come up. You're right. Mm-hmm. There are not a lot of books on moon magic, considering how popular the moon is.
I know. You'll see, I mean, you find a lot of stuff on astrology that talk about like the moon signs and things like that, but there's not too many. I know even growing up, and I believe I put it in my book at the end as one of like the resources for people to look at, was Dorothy Morrison's Everyday Moon Magic. Like that has been my source for moon magic ever since I got it back in like 2003 when it came out. Yeah. But that's what we've had.
Yeah, I remember a year ago, I was looking for a book on moon magic for a book club. And Dorothy Morrison's was the only one that I could find that sounded really legit for modern witches. And
yes,
I have remained shocked about that ever since. Like, it's
like, this doesn't make sense. This can't be true, but it is.
But it is. And that's what
it's great to write it, because you know what? We don't have it. We need it.
Right.
Especially now too. Everyone is so just in love with the moon. I mean, we see so much about the moon now, just going online, and there's articles about it on Bustle, and just everyone is so fascinated by it and doing moon meditations and things. I think it was a really appropriate time. So I'm happy to have had that opportunity.
Yeah, mainstream media has really caught up with the moon love. I'm digging it. I'm glad more. I'm glad more, especially like younger people. I'm so glad that there's going to be more moon loving, like weird kids out there that spend all their time looking up at the sky. I'm so into it. I'm so into that. So let's talk about the book a little bit. The Complete Book of Moon Spells. Mm-hmm. I loved it. I gave it a really great review because not just because it's the only moon book, that's new. That was part of it, of course, but it was so different than even on the blogs and stuff, the information you can find about the moon. I love that you broke it down to all 8 phases and managed to actually hold my attention through all 8 phases. That always seemed so extra to me. So it did. And now I'm like, oh, maybe I should rethink that. What is it about like having these all 8 phases that, why would you include all 8 rather than sticking with the 2 to 4 that most people are used to looking at?
Well, I think that, it was something that never really worked for me growing up and reading the little bits and pieces of moon magic that would be in other books. And I just felt like there was always so much more emphasis to certain phases. But yet at the same time, we look at the moon, it's always whole. It's always doing its thing. It just goes through this illusion of transformation. And with witchcraft being transformative spiritual practice that honors and represents that ebbing and flowing of time, I feel it's more appropriate to work with the moon on a continuous basis rather than just looking at it for like the focal points of like the the cross quarters, if you will, where you have the waning, the waxing, the full, and the new. And then some people that just only focus on the new or the full. I just think that if you are interested in being a celestial witch and you really want to work with the powers of the moon and astrology and those types of things, you're bound to get a better grip on it if you're using the whole rather than pieces. Does that make sense?
It actually really does, because I found, as I was reading it, I would pay attention to whatever the moon phase was at the time.
Yeah.
And I noticed that I was paying a lot more attention to different parts of the moon than I ever had before, and it's just you hold that connection a little bit longer when you see it in all of its glory all throughout the month there.
Yes.
Another thing I really liked about your book was the focus on abundance, but this was not just a book about money magic, which is a lot of people think about abundance.
I know.
It's sad that is like all that people can think of with abundance. But what you have in this book is this kind of this overview of a very abundant way of living and practicing magic. How is it that the moon can draw in just these various types of abundance to people's lives?
Well, I think you kind of nailed it on the head when you said that, when we think about abundance, we think money. But at the same time, abundance, I feel like has kind of become more and more of a pop culture word that's used a lot of times in social media and different things like that. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be money. It just means living a rich and full life. Whether that's materialistically, with luxury, or through the love that you have and share and can give, through your friendships and relationships that you're developing and things. And so I thought that was probably the best way to encompass it. But at the same time, all of the spells that I write, and I think hopefully the message that comes across in it is still very much about like spell work and stuff for empowerment, to empower yourself, because that's always been a major aspect of my practice, constantly focusing on empowerment. And I think that when you do and you feel empowered and you're working this magic and you're really feeling yourself, you start to live abundantly. And as the moon child that I am, it just felt right.
It was a very empowering book. It was equal parts fun and empowering, which is what I also found with the moon phases. So you have these full moons that are very fun and glittery and for celebration.
Yes.
Rather than, casting your most powerful and intense spells at the moon. So is that how you tend to spend your full moons, in this more celebratory way than in this big magic casting way?
Oh, yes. My full moons have always been a really potent time to celebrate myself, celebrate Lilith, work with my goddess, start by having a very fabulous, luxurious, glamorous bath, and then rituals of gratitude and celebration for whatever moon phase is going on. And sometimes, of course, there's spell work involved in it. But I think that, when a lot of times people focus so heavily on the full moon, it's so potent. It's that huge, burst of energy. And I feel like sometimes your spells don't need that big burst of energy, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's better to do it when it's growing, right? Because you're wanting something to grow with you and work with you with that. And so, but the moon and all of its phases have always been very, very impactful in my spell work. And I definitely utilize all of the phases of the moon when it comes to the workings that I do.
I think I'm going to now too, because you reminded me how much I really do love those other parts of the. I love the crescent moon, on either side. I love watching the moon change. Like I said, I have for a long time thought, who needs all 8 phases? But I really loved that overarching journey of the moon, I guess.
And I like what you said too. It was like you focused, as you were reading it, you got to see more phases of the moon. And I think that's really important too, just being witches, a lot of us living in the city world now and city environment like I do here in Chicago. And, I live in this big urban jungle. So how do I still practice with nature? How do I work with nature? And the moon is a part of it. And observing it and paying attention to it and acknowledging it in all of its different phases is just a really great spiritual and magical connection. I don't know how to describe it, but it just makes me feel alive when I go outside and I see the moon. There's something in it. The little witch bug in me starts to twitch, and I'm like, ooh, magic.
It's that little like flash of lightning in there, like, yeah. It's it's witch time. It's moon time.
It's witch time.
That's something else that I noticed about both of your books is that, like me, you're another person who lives in the city and doesn't necessarily fit this very hippie-esque country cottage witch vibe. And there's nothing wrong with that stuff.
No, I love that. I wish I could, but it's not. It's not me.
It's not me. Do you know how many more bugs I'd have to live with out there? Like, I just, I don't know that I could pull it off. I respect it, but it's not for me. And what we have in both of these books is a lot more magic that I think is made for other people like that. That is made for people who maybe don't live as close to nature as some others. Has that been something that you've had to figure out throughout your practice, is how to apply some of this more country witchcraft to your less than country life?
You know what? I would say in the very, very beginning, when I first started out as this young little teen witch in the suburbs, yes. Because I was so focused on it, because everything you were reading in the books at that point was just, you have to do it this way. You have to do it this way. If you're not doing it this, then you're doing it wrong. And after a while, as I started to continuously develop my personal practice and started to make my own rules and what worked right for me, I've been able to kind of shift and figure it out. I mean, I'm trying to think, just being in a city environment is so different too. Like, it's so full of just energy, right? Yeah. So that to me is another element that I work with here in the city. And then, how that energy works with just your inside building parts. Because I always hate too when people are like, you have to see the moon in order to work with it. And it's like, you don't, and we all don't have fabulous big backyards that we can go into. Like, I'm so depressed about, like, with COVID right now, Halloween, and that fabulous full moon, which I know we're going to talk all about, like, not being able to go to the beach and look at it because there's quarantine, like, block-offs because of it there, and plus it's Halloween, so they're going to be like, no, we don't want people over here. Like, I'm sad about that, and I would love to say that, like, every ritual I'm doing, I'm bathing underneath the moonlight, but it just isn't reality sometimes. And just because you can't see it and you're not underneath it doesn't mean it's not there. And I think when we start looking at kind of that naturist aspect of it, I mean, nature is all around us. It's the air that we breathe. It's the sun from the molten core of our planet. It's the water that we drink and the earth that we step upon. So even though I am in a city, I still am connected to all of the elements. Yeah.
It's just a different, it's just a different perspective. I think, like, I feel the same way. The elements in nature is all around me, it just doesn't look exactly the same as it does for some others.
No, not at
all. So you mentioned our moons in October, and I would love to talk about our moons in October. So when this comes out, it'll be October 1st when we have a full moon in Aries.
Yeah.
And then on October 31st, on Halloween, we have a full moon in Taurus. Taurus is such a beautiful, like, moon sign, too.
So I love that you bring that up, because that's another huge part of my moon practice. And I do sprinkle it in the book as well, is using the different astrological phases of the moon. Because every 2 to 3 days, the moon goes into a different astrological phase. So when you kind of pay attention to a little bit more, and there's so many different websites on the Oracle of Google that can help kind of guide people to figuring out what astrological sign the moon is in, they carry their own type of energy. Now, I am a sun sign Aries, so you think I'd be very, very excited for this first Aries moon that we have. But what I've noticed through myself and through other practitioners is that whatever sign your sun sign is in, you usually feel really, like, lethargic and just want to rest when your moon is in that phase.
It's like
And I think that, like, when, at least for me, because I have a moon sign in Libra, and when the moon is in Libra, I feel so much more like down and ready to work with the moon and energy and all of that. And so I think it's going to be interesting, at least for me, and maybe for everybody, because we're going through that Mars retrograde right now.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it just is a standstill at all powers of Mars. So aggression, assertion, sexuality, passion, all of that. It's just kind of like, nope, we're not moving forward. And we have this Aries moon, which is so great for ambition and goals and going after things. So the way that I've kind of been looking at things is in order to counteract the Mars retrograde, is to work a lot of Venetian stuff, which, you know, Taurus later in the month is ruled by Venus. So, you know, I think that just this entire month, the entire month of October, is a really, really wonderful time to do any kind of spell work or magic for self-care that is really about loving yourself. Even to looking at like the times that we're living in and things that are coming up. I mean, I think this is the time that we kind of rejuice ourselves so that we're ready and we can be useful to the world.
Oh,
right?
I hope so.
I'm always telling people, I'm like, look at you, yourself, and your magic like you would a car. If you're on empty, how are you going to help people? How are you going to get from point A to point B? So always take that time to rejuice and rest, and then you can be of better service to people in whatever way that is.
Yeah, I totally agree. I keep trying to be like, no, you have to be more productive now. You know, it's time to get moving again. But when nothing else is really moving forward, it's difficult. So I think focusing on self-care and recharging and, you know, doing some of that stuff that we maybe don't have time to do just for ourselves right now is kind of the best possible way we can spend our witchy time.
Yep.
I'm also a Libra moon, by the way. That's super fun. And I also love a Libra full moon. I find it very like, I do the whole bath. Mm-hmm. It's actually mostly just a bath. I'll stay in there for hours if I have to, but I do the whole.
Like the baths. I love bath spells because you get to be an ingredient in your cauldron of creation.
Right.
Like, they're just so fun. I love them, and they're sexy, and they just feel good, and I love every part of it.
Right, and they're super creative because, like, no two baths are the same, right? You can add different oils and different herbs or spells or crystals or whatever. It's super fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Agreed.
Yeah, and super fun. Now I wish I was taking a bath. So that is our Aries full moon. What about our Taurus full moon near the end of the month? Like, how should we most celebrate our incredibly cool Halloween Taurus moon during a year where we can't go anywhere?
I know. Well, okay, here's the deal. So I've been thinking about it a lot because it just, first and foremost, how lucky are we to be witches alive, having a full moon and Samhain, Halloween, all in one day. Like, it's amazing. I'm so excited. Just the fact that I'm alive through it is amazing.
Yeah, like this never happens. I'm so pumped.
I know. And I meant to go online and Google and be like, when is the next time this is going to happen? Because it's not going to happen for a long time. I believe that. Ooh, so, but so first and foremost, we have the thinning of the veils, right? So we have that whole departed souls and spirits. And if you're really into just the activities of Samhain, and I've not really kind of ever been that type of a witch, a spirit-y witch. I'm more of a glamorous witch who loves the moon and the bath and all of that stuff. But Halloween itself is a very glamorous day because we're all dressing up. That idea is kind of a part of it. It's not only this Day of the Dead type of a festival, but it's also a day to dress up and become someone different, which is it's a part of glamour magic. I mean, to me, real glamour is not creating an illusion, like with an I, that is like something that's completely not there. It's more of creating an illusion with an A, where you're taking something that exists within you and you're presenting it in a way that is something different. Yeah. And so I think that this would be a really great year because, you know, anything glamorous is going to be ruled by Venus. And because the Taurus moon is ruled by Venus, it's a perfect time to really just indulge in who you want to be or how you want the world to see you. So working any type of a glamour magic spell to be seen and to even just dress up and have a fabulous day at home and dance and be crazy and merry, just whoop it up.
Yeah, it's that's such a cool idea, is to work with your costume within, just combine your magic, your witchiness with the Halloween costume idea. And Halloween in general, you're right, is very glamorous. It's very much about aesthetic, along with our more spiritual, our deeper stuff. There's very much aesthetic and symbols and colors and images that mean things to us.
Yes.
I'm so excited about I'm so excited to have a full moon on Halloween.
If you're somebody that does really want to work with the spirits and honor your ancestors or something like that, throwing on, maybe, I don't know, if you have like your grandmother's pearls or I don't know, if you have something of theirs and you dress up in honor of them, that's a really great way of just kind of fusing a little bit of the Halloween festivities with a little bit of glamour magic and also honoring the dead at the same time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What a great idea. Oh, dressing up as your ancestors or creating a look that, that shares kind of how you see them in their essence. What a great idea for any time, but especially a Venetian like full moon.
Full moon
on Halloween.
Come on.
I'm so excited. Like, I keep thinking about it every day. The closer we get to October, I'm like, yes.
I know. It's so funny too, because people are like, well, what are you doing that day? Like, oh, should we hang out? I'm like, no, y'all, this is a major day. I'm alone all night. I got stuff to do.
I've got stuff to do. Day. Yeah, this is my witchy day. You guys can't call me on this day.
No, I was just asked to be, have this kind of like little book signing tarot reading event. And I'm doing it another time during October. But they were like, can you do it on Halloween? And I was like, absolutely not. No.
That's my day off. Sorry.
Darn it.
Oh no, I have to take a day off. How terrible. So Thank you. I'm super excited. Now, you didn't get a chance in this book to talk a lot about blue moons, because I mean, the blue moon, it's not as rare as we think. It does come around every 2 years or so. Do you do anything special for the blue moons, for the second moon in a month, however you define your blue moon?
I honestly just kind of acknowledge it. I look at what sign it's in. I mix magics according to that. And there are times where I do put a little bit more extra into like it being a wishful moon, because I always think the blue moons is a great time just to amplify your energy and your desire and get what it is that you want. So again, we have that kind of element here, with this one that's coming up, and with it being such a like amazing witch day, just in general. Like, I feel like anyone that's doing that's your day, you're just going to want to put all of your efforts into your magic and just really push it there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if anyone's got any sort of, like, big spell they want to do, or if there's some sort of, like, magical transformation they're trying to do, that full moon at the end of October there is, like, such a perfect time.
It's just great. I mean, also just because, I'm a big believer in, too, like, if we give something power, like, we give things power based off of the way that we think about them, right? Mm-hmm. So with everyone already thinking like, oh my gosh, this is going to be like the most magical day ever, we're already boosting it up to be the most magical day ever. So let's get on board with that and all push our energy into it and hopefully come out feeling extra charged.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If all of us think that the moon is going to be super magical, then it absolutely will be. How could it not be?
Yes, exactly.
Celebrate Samhain and the thinning of the veil with Green Moon Apothecary, a subscription box that offers tools for self-care, witchcraft, and wellness, all with a cannabis-infused twist. In modern-day witchcraft, more and more people are exploring how the cannabis plant can be incorporated into their spiritual practices. Each of Green Moon Apothecary's boxes includes specially curated items to assist with ritual and spell work, manifestation, and divination, all while celebrating the spirit of the cannabis plant and the wheel of the year. Indulge in enchantment by subscribing to a Green Moon box, or explore their many magical witchy weed products at greenmoon.ca. Be sure to follow the Witches of Green Moon on Instagram at green.moon.apothecary for their latest news and witch tips. Fat Feminist Witch listeners can get 10% off their first order with the code FFW10. If you order the Samhain box by October 19th, you are guaranteed to get it by Halloween. So visit greenmoon.ca today. I love that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Lilith, because your first book, The Glam Witch, was all about your relationship and your practice with Lilith. And one of the things that connects these two books is that you talk about Lilith as a moon goddess in Glam Witch. And this is maybe not a role that a lot of people associate with Lilith. Night, sure, but maybe not the moon. What is the connection between Lilith and the moon?
Well, there's a couple. I remember too, even just growing up and researching and trying to develop a relationship with her, you'd see her a lot as like the waiting moon goddess. She was that dark goddess energy of the moon. But then if I look through like historical relevances more and even some pieces of the Kabbalah, which I'm not great at, so I can't talk super much on it, but there are references to Lilith being the moon. And then we also have references to, and one of the reasons why I go by the Glam Witch, and I called it the Glam Witch, was in Doreen Valiente's book, ABC of Witchcraft, she references Lilith as a moon goddess, and that she is the dark glamour of the moon. And I was like, I loved that definition so much. Because she really, really is. And she's also connected to, in astrology, we all have 3 Lilith points in our chart. And just think about that for a second, 3. Like all of these different astrological things. Lilith was given 3. And so she's considered the dark moon and the black moon in astrology. And then she's got an asteroid. But she's heavily connected to the moon cycles and moon phases, not necessarily in the same way that maybe like Selene or would be, but I think more in the way that like Hecate kind of is too, because Lilith is a goddess of transformation. She's connected to those darker aspects of things and shining through darkness. And I kind of mentioned too, I think at one point in one of the books, looking at the moon and even if there's no moon in the sky yet, just trusting yourself through the darkness, because the moon will reemerge and it'll help guide you through those difficult times. And that's really how Lilith has been in my life too. So.
Yeah, you can really tell that your book about your practice with Lilith was much more personal than moon spells, which is a little bit more kind of overall. How did your relationship with Lilith begin? Like, did this really begin when you were a small child, when you were pretty young?
Yeah, looking back on it, I'm like, oh crap, I came out of the womb and she stamped her stamp on me.
She's just been there the whole time.
I mean, yeah, looking at literally everything that she's connected to, it's all of my favorite things have been associated with her. I mean, I grew up loving witches from the get-go. I loved the moon. I loved Barbies. And one of the really fascinating things that I just recently-ish learned about Lilith, I found out about it after I wrote the book, and I was so sad because I was like, this would have been a fun chapter, is that Barbie, our original Barbie, with that black and white swimsuit and everything, was based off of a doll in Germany that looked almost identical, but she wasn't sold and marketed to kids. She was marketed to men, and she was in these like sex shops and smoke shops and things like that. And she was named Belle Lilith. Or Lily or something along those lines. But Lilith was basically kind of like this prototype to her. And it's really cool looking at some of these old campy like cartoons, and it's just very Lilith, so I love dolls. And also if you look at Barbie's world, I mean, how Lilith is that? I mean, men are the accessory.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The main character.
Wow, that would have been a great chapter, because this is like blowing my mind right now.
Barbie has had every job, and Lilith has worn every hat, basically, as being called everything from demon to goddess to everything in between. Right. And, I also have always been a rare one that is always associated like hot pink with Lilith. Yeah. Because it's so, it's a really different than like that fluffy like cotton candy pink.
It's so
hot
different.
Pink is just like this feminine seduction, raw, and that's Barbie's color.
Right.
So I like Barbie. I think Barbie and Lilith. I don't know. That could be a whole book in itself. That might be something I do later.
That's like the passion project for later on. I'd read a whole book about that. I love Barbie. I'd read a whole book about that.
I know. Well, and then so with Lilith, you know, I the first time I ever like saw her and was really like, oh my gosh, like who is this? It was in a comic book of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and you know, Lilith was there as the mother of all vampires and being, you know, demonic and stuff. And after I started to get books, and my first book that I really, really kind of dug deep into, and Lilith was in it, was Fiona Horn's A Magical Journey. And, you know, at that point, the Oracle of Google was not what it was today. There wasn't really good stuff on Lilith, especially for, you know, a 10, 11-year-old to research.
Right.
And so, you know, I really kind of just kept pushing her away until I saw on Mad House, with a show that Fiona was on, that she was also a devotee to her. And that was when I really suspended my own cynicism and was like, you know what? She's screaming at me. I open up a book, I'll see her name. I'll turn on television. There'll be a character named Lily or something. And, you know, I'm over here speed dating with all these other goddesses because I'm just like, where's my goddess? And not finding a connection. And here she is literally handing herself to me on a silver platter. But one of the things that scared me was, of course, that negative talk about her, but also the fact that there was nothing out there about her. There was just historical stuff. And it was like, where are the invocations? Where are her sacred items? And finally, I just listened to her. You know, you finally just start listening in meditations and seeing the symbolisms and looking back at the mythologies from around that time and putting the pieces of it together. And I mean, it's taken a good 20 years, but we're here, and now my practice is soaring.
I was actually wondering if your practice or your relationship with Lilith has changed or grown at all since you wrote the book.
Absolutely. And I think too, you know, just looking at some of life's challenges that get thrown in the way. I mean, the whole time I wrote the book and everything, I was in a long relationship, and that relationship ended through COVID. And what I'm learning more about Lilith right now is the vulnerability that she has. Like, everyone's always wants to be like, oh my gosh, she's a bad bitch. Like, she's the bomb. Like, oh, she just left Eden and she left all these things and she's wonderful. But you know what? Sometimes, yeah, people can be strong, but that doesn't mean that they weren't sad in the process of it.
Right.
That doesn't mean that there was a price that came with it. I mean, any strong person who's endured a lot has had to go through the pits, and Lilith has. And I'm realizing more of the sadness that comes with her, and the way that she channeled it and works with it, and how I can now work with it. Especially being in this time of isolation, which if we look at Lilith too, you know, when the going got rough, she hid. She ran into the wilderness. She took cover. She took refuge. And so being a goddess of isolation and independence, it's she's challenging me a lot right now. But I love it. It's so cool just to see the evolution of how we've worked together.
That is cool. I definitely felt at the beginning of the lockdown, the quarantine, the pandemic, that Lilith was like the unofficial representative of this time.
I remember you that, and I was like, yes.
She was everything, and you're right, all of the solitude, and you know, she spent tons of time alone in between leaving that garden and becoming her own goddess of a kind. You know, she had adventures, but I'm sure she wasn't happy and badass all the way through. There is definitely that fear and that vulnerability.
Yep. That comes with it. And at the end of the day, it makes you stronger. If you allow it to consume you and you allow it to hurt you, that's where we don't want to go. But I think that's where, like, the work with Lilith is this kind of goddess of the shadow self too, really comes into play, because she'll guide you through those shadows and that darkness and that dark time. She'll test you a lot, because she's definitely a dark goddess. I mean, she's going to throw challenges at you left and right just for fun sometimes. But, you know, you kind of got to go through it. You know, everything.
Do that stuff, yeah.
I read something yesterday. It was like some quote on Instagram. It was something along the lines of, all of the challenges that you're experiencing right now is preparing you for what you want. So just enjoy the ride.
Yeah. That's so important. It's a hard lesson, I think, especially right now. It's going to be better one day. It's hard to remember that, but it's so true.
Yeah. And I think, too, another big thing, and I really tried to get it across in the Glam Witch, I have, of course, a chapter that I call Bionic Bitchcraft, and talking about hexing and the darker magics of Lilith, because that's just, what we always hear, what we always see. And when I really got down to it, because I've definitely done a hex, I've definitely done some of that stuff. But when I was coming to write about it and how I was going to express, how Lilith is connected to it, I really had to check myself and say, well, every time that she's been with an adversarial situation, she just leaves.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that magical fight or flight when you're reaching these challenging times. Or does it make sense to fight, or does it make sense to take shelter and protect yourself and move away from it?
Right.
It's kind of the same thing of like, a hurricane is coming. Are you going to go stand out in the hurricane and try to fight it and challenge it? You're going to take shelter.
Right.
And
that's such a good point.
And that, I can't take credit for it. That was something that Fiona said at one point in one of her classes at HexFest when she was talking about hurricane magic. But I was like, no, but that makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Why am I going to go fight the storm? Yeah. Let me take shelter.
Right. That is not a fight that you can win at all. There's no winning. You just got to wait it out.
Yeah. So, yeah, I love Lilith. I love the moon. I love witchcraft. I'm happy to be here.
I do too. I loved Glam Witch. I actually learned a lot about myself, especially with that Lilithian astrology. Like, again, I could do way more Lilithian astrology and just love every second of it.
It's cool. And I will say, because astrology can be so dense, you can go really far down the rabbit hole with it. But, when I finally learned, because I actually went to an astrologist to have my chart read, and she was like, well, what aspects do you want to learn about? I was like, I would really love it if you could just teach me about Lilith right now in this hour. Because I read some of these books and it just goes through my eyes and out my head. Mm-hmm. And when I finally actually learned it in a way that I could then speak it to other people, I was just like, oh, this is really fascinating. And oh, this is really cool. And let me try to make it less intense for people so that they get it. Because it's important and it's something really cool. And you learn a lot about yourself in the process. So
yeah, and thank you for that, because it was really hard to find just a very clear layout of, the 3 different points and what they mean and, how to deal with all 3 points. It was so hard to find that information before.
Trust me, I had to find the sources for it.
And you know what? I gotta say, The Glam Witch is probably one of the best researched books I've read on witchcraft.
Oh, thank you.
The research was so good, and you had your little footnotes and resources, so I was able to find that stuff. I was just so blown away with the level of research.
We did, and I really liked how I put together my resources section where it was done by chapter, but in the back, because sometimes it just is so hard looking at that whole thing and trying to guess where the important parts are coming from and stuff. So this way, at least, a bit more of a guide. And all of that, my one chapter that was all about the historical side of Lilith, man, that was the hardest thing I've ever had to write in my life. My editor was just kind of like, oh my gosh, this book has so much personality, and then that is just dry toast. So we're going to have to redo it, and we're going to have you cut some stuff out, and I'm going to need you to get really, really drunk and record yourself talking about Lilith. And I did, because it was hard. I was like, when I was doing the historical stuff, the old student in me came out doing a history paper. Right. It's like, blah, 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 blah. I had to put some fun into it, and that was hard. But I'm really happy with the way that it came out, and I wish that I could have put more in. But at least I have, all of the resources that I've collected over the years are in my resources section. So if anyone's interested in learning more about Lilith's history, I have a whole little section that shows all the books that it came from.
Yeah, well, I hope more people take advantage of the, again, a very extensive resource section, which I love. That is for me. I hope more people take advantage of that. I found the whole history chapter to be super interesting. Super interesting, because you're right. It was hard to find kind of the whole story. You got these really cool bits and pieces, but the whole story was lacking. So
everyone wants to jump right on that whole Lilith is Adam's first wife bandwagon. And that's a pivotal story, but that's literally halfway through her story.
Right.
That's the middle.
That's the middle. Yeah, like there was a whole bunch of stuff before and after that. That was like your climax. You're missing the rest of the story if you only see that.
Exactly. So I'm happy with it.
I'm glad because I loved both books. You've done a really great job, and I look forward to seeing what books you write next. I'm excited.
I'm writing one right now. I can't really say much about it, but it's been hard writing a book during quarantine and Mars retrograde and all of that. I've realized that the first two books I wrote predominantly at coffee shops, and I can't go to those anymore. And so writing at home is a challenge.
I've had this like identical experience. I was like, oh, cool. I'll have all this quarantine time to get my next book finished. And it's just, it's very, very hard to write right now.
Exactly.
I can't even explain why. It just is.
I'm at the point where the most productive thing I do is watch Netflix. So my next book could be just, 1 page long. I watch Netflix for a year.
Yeah. I mean, I've watched everything witchy that any of these services could provide me, but that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much to Michael for joining us on the show today. That was so fun. Such a fun interview. I'm so excited about these full moons. I'm so excited about Halloween. So, tonight's full moon, as you heard him say, is in the sign of Aries. Aries it's associated with Mars. It's a very action-oriented, fiery sign. But with all of the other stuff going on in the sky, astrologically, and also in the world, the best way to spend this moon is taking care of yourself. Aries is a sign that's very associated with the self. Aries put themselves first, and they do things that make them happy, and they fight for themselves, So this full moon is a really good time to spend some time with yourself and on yourself. So some of us might have been working really hard, and it's time to give ourselves a break. Some of us might have had some hard breaks and need to distract ourselves, need to go on an adventure or do something kind of fun. And of course, a magical bath is always a very good idea for any full moon. No matter how you spend it, I hope all of you witches have a phenomenal full moon tonight. Now, as I said earlier, I am putting out an episode every week in October to celebrate Halloween. And next week's episode is going to be really fun. It's called Practical Pumpkin Spice Magic. So I'm going to be talking about pumpkins. I'm going to be talking about pumpkins, their magical properties, how they became associated with Halloween, and how you can work with pumpkins and pumpkin spice in your own practice and in your spell work this year. I'm also going to talk about Practical Magic, the movie. I don't know how many of you remember, quite a while now, I talked about the craft here on the show. And I think I called it this little segment called Silver Screen Spellcraft. And I intended to come back and do it. What I did was look at some of the magic that was practiced in the movie and talk about how legitimate it was and, maybe ways you could bring that magic into your own real life. So I'm going to be doing that with fall witchy favorite Practical Magic. So next week is going to be a really great time to put on your cozy sweaters and slippers and an infinity scarf and grab a pumpkin spice latte and listen to me talk about this silly and wonderful witchy rom-com, as well as the very excellent books that birthed the characters and everything from this movie that we love. So I hope you guys will all join me for that, and every other week this month for some witchy Halloween content here on The Fat Feminist Witch. If you want to learn more about me and about the show, you can do that at my website, thefatfeministwitch.com. You can also find me all across social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest by searching for Fat Feminist Witch. If you like the content here on the show, you might also like my books. I wrote 2 books this year. So I have Green Witchcraft, which came out in February and is all about creating a natural and magical relationship with the planet. And the Grimoire Journal, which actually is a journal that you can fill in to help you write personalized spells and rituals, as well as sharing some of my own and personal family recipes to get you started. So Green Witchcraft and the Grimoire Journal can be purchased anywhere you buy books online, and if you are a local witchy store who is selling the book and you want a shout out, please let me know. I would love to shout you out so that people can get it from a local retailer. Some ways that you can support the show: you can go to patreon.com/thefatfeministwitch and join our private monthly membership group. You can make a small one-time donation by going to my website and clicking Buy Me a Coffee. Or you can advertise here on the show by going to advertisecast.com/thefatfeministwitch. A special thanks again to the sponsor for this special interview episode, Green Moon Apothecary. I really hope you guys will check out their subscription boxes that come out for all 8 Witches' Sabbats and feature items that you can use in both your magical and general wellness practices. So visit greenmoon.ca to find out more about the boxes, and of course you can find them on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest, and I will be putting all of that information in the description for this episode. Have a wonderful full moon and a wonderful October. I will see you all here again next week on The Fat Feminist Witch.